Welcome to the Tech Deep Dive podcast, where we let our inner nerd come out and have fun getting into the weeds on all things tech. At Clarksys, we believe tech should make your life better, searching Google is a waste of time, and the right vendor is often one you haven't heard of before. Hi, I'm Max Clark, and I'm talking with Chuck Price, who's the COO and co-founder of Effectual. Chuck, thanks for joining.
Thank you, Max. It's great to be here.
Chuck, you've been in the internet industry for quite some time. I won't say exactly how long, but
Thank you.
Your path on, as LinkedIn reports, it's traditional IT and corporate IT. I mean, you've got actually, I think the one note that I saw that was more interesting was a CIO for the SANS Institute for a while, and a security practitioner that, of course, stands out to me. But data centers and different professional services organizations. I mean, can you give me a quick kind of background for context of how you've ended up co-founding Effectual and what led into that?
Sure. It's been a long and storied path. Prior military, first Gulf War, and then did government contracting for about 10 years after I got out, writing software, C++ programming. And ended up writing software that flew on the space shuttle and for Tomahawk missile systems. And so some fairly detailed, technology stuff. I worked on weapon systems in the military, sort of double E sort of stuff. And then became a CTO managing agile software delivery of products globally. And then moved from that CTO sort of software product, SaaS product development world into infrastructure, and started managing data centers and larger teams, built professional services companies along the way, and ended up at CoreSite. CoreSite's probably a data center provider that lots of folks will know about. And I joined them to help them do an IPO. So we did the IPO there. And then right about that time, 2010 or so, the cloud was really starting to take shape, if that's not an oxymoron. The data center industry was worried about the cloud industry eating its lunch. And I said, it's not going to happen, right? The clouds live in data centers at the end of the day. And so really saw this vision for building a cloud services company that was by CIOs for CIOs. I had lots of peer CIOs that were struggling with the same challenge. And that's how I got into the industry, really. And then kind of went on from there and, ended up working for the SANS Institute, which was an amazing opportunity for me. I really, really enjoyed that team, learned a ton being a part of that business. The world's largest cybersecurity training company. We trained about almost 50,000 students globally every year. So that was a great ride. And then ended up working for a cloud service provider that was an AWS partner. And so really started learning a lot more about IaaS and hyperscale infrastructure. Not too long after that, was introduced to the founder of Effectual, Rob Allen, and also Michael Parks, our CTO. And those guys built DataPipe. I think a lot of your listeners will probably remember DataPipe, second largest privately held business when they were acquired by Rackspace back in 2017. And 29 operating locations globally, and the first AWS Premier partner, and just a fantastic reputation in the business. Of course, I knew them, from competing with them and getting beat by them. And so really hit it off with Rob and Mike and many of the other team. The leadership team from Effectual came from that team that Rob and Mike built over 18 years. And so really feel fortunate to have met those folks, and we're birds of a feather. And so super excited to be a part of the Effectual team now.
Let's talk about Effectual. I mean, this isn't DataPipe 2.0. I mean, so what is Effectual, and where do you guys see yourself fitting in this, world as over the next couple of years?
Sure. Yeah. Effectual was founded to be cloud first, right? We're an innovative cloud first professional and managed services company. AWS is our alliance partner, our key alliance partner, and VMware is also another alliance partner of ours. And we work with VMware for VMC on AWS. So we help companies move to AWS using VMC. But Rob and Mike and the others saw this opportunity to build a business that is more innovative, cloud first. If we never have to own another physical server in our life, that's our goal. Right? Our goal is to help companies figure out how to make that a reality, and we're fortunate to get to do that every day. And so we do that across not just commercial businesses and large businesses at that, but public sector. So we're growing organically, we're growing acquisitively. You can look at some of the press release action there. Our first round, the A round, a lot of companies A rounds are like $2-3 million. Our A round was a $50 million A round from a couple of key private equity investors. So, just the experience, the depth of expertise from the whole team, from the deck plates, ground level, infrastructure, technical, all the way up to, Rob is our CEO, is just incredible.
For a while, the presence of the cloud was okay. We can go to the cloud. We don't have to own servers anymore, right? I mean, there's that sort of angle to it.
Hmm.
And it feels like a lot of companies also went into it of like, oh, we're at the cloud now. We don't have to approach IT the same way, or we don't need as much IT, or we don't need a managed services provider overlay. And that really hasn't been the case at all. I mean, cloud has become its own incredibly complex animal.
That's right.
That's kind of like off. I mean, it's incredible. So I'm curious, how you would really describe that, and what this means for you as a professional services organization with AWS, and what you're doing for companies and your customers now.
Yeah, for sure. More and more companies are moving to the cloud, right? Gartner is estimating that by 2024, 50% of cloud services deals will include everything from application development services, cloud native, cloud infrastructure using professional and managed services. 50%. And that's up from about 10% from 2019. So 90% of organizations that don't use professional services assistance for cloud infrastructure as a service and migrations for more agility and efficiency, 90% of those organizations have challenges in doing that. And then 90% of Fortune 100 companies use a partner to leverage AWS services. So if you look at some of those trends, right, and we say, what are larger companies doing that for perhaps have more resources and sort of better insight, can afford the Gartner analysis type vision? They're leveraging partners to do this. And so it is more complex. It's not as simple as a lift and shift. Let's take my VMDK on VMware in my data center and just drag it over to an EC2 instance. Now, certainly that's how companies can do that and get started in cloud infrastructure very quickly. And we do recommend that in a lot of cases, right? Because the other side of that coin is, well, we can't move to the cloud because we've got to redevelop our application to be cloud native. We've got to re-architect our database. We've got to re-architect the whole network. And we don't have the skills associated with operating in a cloud environment. And actually doing a lift and shift migration is a very rapid way to decrease cost, physical on-prem type cost or colo cost, to get into an infrastructure as a service platform like AWS. And then from there, you have a lot more tools available to transform and modernize. So our modernization engineers are, skilled and passionate about helping companies transform that infrastructure to more cloud native. And the reason you need some more expert experience, right, is because AWS has over 200 services that are available. So imagine a toolbox of 200 tools that you can put together, or I use Legos, right? Imagine all these different Legos, and somebody comes in your office and dumps out a bucket of Legos and says, somewhere in that pile, there's a Millennium Falcon. Build it. And if you're not a master builder, you can just kind of look at that pile and go, oof, that's going to take me a while, right? So we've got a company of master builders, and we love, taking all the tools and all the services, and they're changing at a rapid pace. I think you know this, right? Every quarter they're releasing more and more changes to those services. So we have over 150 certifications in the business. So we really enjoy coming alongside our customers and being a partner to them, not just being a vendor. Like, we hate that word vendor, because if we get looked at like a vendor, like we're failing, right? We really want to be a part of our customers' teams and understand their business challenges, from go to market to finance, all those things, and be a part of their team and be the part that says, hey, we understand how the Legos work. We can help you build it, migrate, and operating in a cloud in a secure and compliant way.
What is that like for, a company as they onboard with Effectual? I mean, how do you actually embed and integrate with them and go through that evaluation of these are your business processes? And, you know, this
Yeah.
isn't just a lift and shift from, VMware on site to VMC and AWS. Like, let's actually get deeper into this. I mean, how
Yeah.
how do you guys approach that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, if you look at companies' cloud journeys, right, they happen in these phases. Over time, we've learned that as companies start to try to adopt to cloud infrastructure, they start out in this phase where they need to do a strategic engagement, or do an assessment, right? Cloud readiness assessment. Maybe they have compliance needs for PCI or HIPAA or FedRAMP in the government space. They want to do a TCO analysis. So our professional services team can engage with them and guide them through that process from a strategic analysis. What are your business goals? What are your business outcomes you're looking for? What are your cost dynamics of your business? Some companies that we meet, they say, we just need to get there really fast and we have a bit more capital to go faster. And some companies say we're a little more risk averse. We want to be a bit more deliberate about the process and sort of meter it out over time. Some companies we meet, however, are in this sort of modernization and migration phase. They've already said we're in the cloud, we're either doing proof of concepts or we have one application that's a production application, and we need to scale up. We need better DevSecOps automation. We need infrastructure as code. We need to expand and scale our business. So that's in this sort of modernization and migration life cycle of a customer adapting or adopting the cloud. And then there's companies who say we're kind of all in on the cloud. We just need some assistance in managing our infrastructure, our database footprints going. How do we leverage more of the 200 services to optimize our environment? And then that last phase is companies who have born in the cloud, and how do they optimize their environment further with cost optimization. So we do immersion days with them. We do well architected reviews with them on their workloads. We can put together various scalability architecture. We can help them transform more to infrastructure as code, leverage rather than EC2 instances all the time, containerization, right? So how do we leverage containerization in our again, our modernization engineers really like this. Hey, we appreciate you using EC2 instances and you have auto scaling and that works great. How about Kubernetes? How about Docker? And how about ECS and Fargate? And how do we help you get more performance and agility out of your existing infrastructure? So that's the broad picture from a phase of life cycle that the customer is in and how we would engage them in those different life cycles.
You know what I think about when you say that? I mean, it's all these questions on the surface seem very simplistic, but each one of them is a very deep conversation. So, I mean, EC2 to containers, right? So, are you going to run containers on EC2 instances? Are you going to run Kubernetes on your own EC2 instances? Are you going to run ECS or EKS or Fargate? Are you going to run Rancher? Or, and like and that the depth of each one of those steps of question. I mean, you go really deep pretty quickly. Are you running Dynamo or do you want to run Cassandra or Cycla? Are you going to run and back to your Lego analogy, which I actually loved. I mean, how you piece these things together you can get to the same end result in lots of different ways, right? But how you get there, what it looks like, and how much it costs become very different as well.
They matter. Yeah. And yeah, that's exactly right. So, we had a customer who was trying to transform. They had 3 data centers, about 1,000 servers, and it was a very highly optimized environment and for high transaction volume processing. And so they said, "Look, we've purchased these servers, we built these servers, they're specialized. There's no way we can move to the cloud. Like our CFO keeps pushing us, like, hey, everybody else is doing cloud. Why aren't we doing cloud?" And we just, we said there's no way, right? It's not possible. We've optimized it cost efficient, for this physical environment. So they worked with other folks, and they even worked with AWS, and AWS's economics team put together a model for them that said, yeah, we're not really saving money here. So they came to us, and we said, well, you're not using containerization, right? You could drop those 1,000 servers down to a handful, tens of very beefy i3 instance, EC2 instances on AWS, and you could get a lot of performance in containerization. And they're like, no way, we can't containerize this application. There's just no way. Well, long story short, we worked with them over about 4 months to build out a model, prove the model, and not just the performance of it, but the economics of it. And we knocked their cost down by almost 2/3. And these are sharp guys. I mean, they've been in the IT industry for a long time, and they were like, "Hey, show us how." And so they learned some new tricks, and we got to build some cool new innovative stuff, and it was awesome.
That story it's so repetitive and so familiar in terms of, we're going to move an existing application and we're just going to migrate it as is into a cloud platform. And oh, surprise, it maybe is more expensive than what they were operating
Hmm.
beforehand. Or we have this existing application that's running in AWS and it's expensive. And if you change it a little bit, you get a massive cost savings. I mean, you see stories, on an almost daily basis of people, of big SaaS companies saying, hey, we re-architected our data pipeline and we saved 70% of our monthly bill. I mean, now it's almost like I assume every company has a 30 to 40% waste in their AWS environment without even talking to them. You start that conversation off with, yeah, you could probably save 30 to 40% if you just look at your architecture. I mean, are you
Yeah.
seeing the same kind of generalities starting to apply as you engage?
Yeah, there's always opportunity for improvement, right? And we're a part of a program at AWS called the Well Architected program. And part of the Well Architected program was we do these reviews, and we look at different. We'll analyze a workload, and we'll look at different pillars. So we'll look at cost, we'll look at performance, security, operations, and we dive deeper in. There's like 100 questions in each of these different areas, and so if a customer is wanting to, if they're more concerned about cost, then we can focus more on cost optimization. And to your point, they're probably doing the first level things like, yeah, we've right sized our instances based on performance. And we say, okay, well, what about these dev environments or these QA environments? Do you have it built so that it automatically, spins up and spins up when developers come to work and spins down when they go home? Or do you have them auto scaling, or do you just have them the same size all the time? Or are you leveraging RI instances in the background to optimize the cost of that? Or, there's a number of cost strategies that we can apply when we look at a particular pillar going through this well architected review. And to your point, as we look deeper in each of these pillars, we continue to find ways to optimize and enhance their security. I remember when I was at SANS, we had a lot of conversation about the cloud is not secure, right? And look at the set of tools. You can build insecure infrastructure in a data center with physical equipment, just like you can build insecure infrastructure in the cloud. So it takes, sort of skilled artisans to know how to put the Lego blocks together, who've done it before and understand how hardening works and immutable infrastructure and all those sorts of things. And so we do find opportunities to improve. And AWS actually recommends that customers go and look at this work on a workload basis, do a well-architected review every quarter, because the set of tools, the set of Lego blocks, the set of services are continuing to grow so rapidly today. They can continue to adapt and adopt new architecture and capabilities.
And counter to what would be like conventional wisdom, Amazon and AWS in some cases incentivizes customers to go through these processes. I mean, they want people to improve their infrastructure and reduce their cost and
That's
and be
right.
more efficient. I mean, it's kind of, like it sounds a little crazy, but they want people to be improving their infrastructure and decreasing their costs.
It's true. And to be a part of the well-architected program, you got to have a certain number of certified engineers and all that sort of thing, but to even make it over the hurdle. But part of the requirement is we do well-architected reviews for customers for free. That's a requirement of the program. You can't charge for them. So, if a customer wants us to come and do an assessment of a particular workload, and we can do it in a few hours in a day, and then sort of the next day provide the recommendations back. So this red, yellow, green roadmap of improvement ideas, how they can improve that environment. So it's a very rapid way to engage. It's a very AWS is encouraging people sort of lowering the bar, lowering the hurdle to be able to leverage their infrastructure and the services. And so we do those assessments for free. We can turn them very, very quickly, and we always find opportunities.
Mentioning SANS and talking about the cloud is not inherently secure. I mean, nothing's inherently secure. I mean, that's right. You, you,
That's
you
right.
you talked about that. The cloud gives, I think, more opportunities to make bigger oops. And that's you have more opportunities to configure an IAM incorrectly and have a security key, a root key that gets out into a GitHub repository, or whoops, we've exposed a database to the internet, or S3 buckets exposed to the internet. These sorts of things can happen very easily, and you find out about them because there's a horror story that hits the internet of like
Yeah.
somebody's S3 bucket was public, and like, oh, we have all of our medical transcription files for 100,000 patients on the internet. And that's kind of a problem in the HIPAA world, right? There's these sorts of things apply. And when you look at the service depth and the amount of change and flux in these infrastructure, I mean, how do you help customers go through this and make sure that, I mean, this isn't, it's not your infrastructure. I mean, in the old data center hosting worlds, right? A service provider owned the infrastructure and kind of set boundaries of, hey, customer, you can only do X, Y, and Z, and you don't have root access to your servers. I mean, in the cloud world, you're helping them support their AWS environment, but it's their AWS environment. What's that like working with these, larger enterprises and helping them, helping the organization protect itself, but at the same time, it's still owned by that organization.
Yeah, it's that's where that partnership comes in, right? And we really want to be a part of their team and have that conversation. So, like you said, in a physical environment, you can have security vulnerabilities, and the thing about it is the response time oftentimes is longer in a physical environment, right? So from the time you detect something to the time you can remediate it, often is a longer period of time than you're able to do in cloud infrastructure. And the way that you achieve that in cloud infrastructure is to automate things and to have specific architectural patterns from the beginning. AWS has this sort of modern architecture view now called landing zones. And they have a new capability. I mean, not super new. It's been out for a couple of years, but AWS organizations. So there's a way to architect at scale enterprise environments from the beginning to bake in security and bake in compliance from the very beginning. And it's not, most people when they think about AWS, like, oh, I'm going to go open an account, right? So most companies have, tens or hundreds of accounts. And it's important to do that now because it decreases the blast zone, the blast radius of an impact of a security flaw or something like that. So that's just one of the architectural tenets that we apply when we build out a new environment for a customer is these built-in security things, built-in guardrails, built-in checks with Trusted Advisor and a number of AWS security services that we can leverage. But the automation piece of it is another thing that people don't quite grasp right out of the gate. I mean, imagine building, a multi-rack infrastructure in a data center of servers and network and storage and all of the security firewalls, but everything that goes into that, and how long it would take you to do that. Just from if everything was available, forget the procurement process. Everything is there. You just got to turn it on, configure it, and put it on the internet. It's weeks, months, right? And
We used to calculate 20 minutes a server to rack. I mean,
a rack, right?
to break down pallets of boxes with servers in them, with the math was basically 20 minutes a server to put it into a rack.
Yeah,
that wasn't OS load and everything else. That was just getting the machine physically mounted and
that's right.
cardboard dealt with.
Yeah, there's human, physics involved, right? Like you can only
Yeah.
go so fast there. In the cloud world, we can literally automate infrastructure as code. And you say that, and people kind of sometimes roll their eyes like, oh, it's infrastructure as code. But imagine that a server is a piece of code and you can version it and I can spin it up in seconds or minutes. And now imagine I can string together an automation script, if you will, but infrastructure as code that literally builds out multiple accounts associated with multiple organizations with the proper IAM roles and guardrails, security, compliance checks, reporting, monitoring, dashboards. I mean, everything that you would think of that you would want to build in a data center enterprise environment in an O&M, to monitor and manage that system, we can literally build in hours. Like, not kidding. I could start the script and you could have, 50 servers with a full enterprise architecture in hours stood up. And then we get to start doing the business value stuff, like what applications do we need to run? Where does the data need to live? How do we expose it to the customer? But all that guardrail stuff's built in now.
How does this evolve the role of the IT department within a company? Traditionally IT departments were very physical, right? You have to go
Right.
touch a machine under a desk, change a monitor, fix a printer, go install a server, change tapes. I mean, how when you look at and we talk about okay, over 200 services in AWS and specialization of those services, right? I mean, that's a big shift in IT and how IT functions for a company. So
Mhm.
what's actually happening here?
Yeah, we see it as really providing more tools and capabilities to our customers' IT teams. We're not replacing them, right? We're, again, being a partner to them. We're augmenting their team and we're providing new skills and tools and capabilities. So, a development team that used to, in order to deploy code, had to, um, it was a big long deployment process. You got a blue green deployment. You got to take the server offline, deploy some code, test it. This whole process for deployment. Today, we can build continuous integration and continuous development pipelines where a developer can write some code or a marketing person can develop some content for a website, drop that content into a repository, into a Git repo somewhere. And we can have automation watching that and automatically deploy that to production where it's not patching. You don't have to do patching in that world, right? Because you just delete the software version of the server and rebuild the new one with the new code already in it, with the new patches already in it. And so we're giving them new tools. They can go back to their business now and they can say, hey, the marketing team wanted to deploy changes, content changes to our marketing site faster. We could never do it because our development process, our deployment process was just sort of physically this long. Now we can empower them, enable them almost self-service. Like they just drop the content in it and it flows to production. And so those type of tools free that IT team up to focus on their roadmap things. So now their company can come back to them and say, wow, these additional capabilities for our product we've been wanting to build out, we suddenly have human capacity to go do this. We've just effectively hired a half a FTE or another FTE or two FTE because they have this capacity back to do more value adding work for their business.
A stat that you mentioned earlier, I want to touch on for a second. I mean, Effectual at its core is a professional services organization, and you're focused on AWS and VMware in the cloud, so VMC.
Mm-hmm.
A $50 million raise. So that is, I mean, so you have acquisitions, that come into that,
Mm-hmm.
right? But when you say a
Right.
$50 million raise, it's $50 million of money being raised to build out human capital to support professional services and a specialization for AWS. I don't care how big of a company you are. You don't have the budget to invest $50 million in IT and profession and people to go out and build out an expertise around AW. I mean, that makes no economic sense for anybody. So when I hear you and like listening to all this and kind of coming back to it, it's why wouldn't why would you try to do this yourself? I mean, you can't replicate this skill set. I mean, there's a company has no shot. And actually, I mean, also I'm assume just a talent pool. It's like security. It's not competitive for companies to try to hire security practitioners because it's hard to keep them motivated and engaged and present. The turnover is so high. I mean, is AWS specialization going that same way, where it's just going to be harder and harder for companies to hire, train, and reach and retain staff to support these environments for themselves? I mean, especially when you start talking about not necessarily application development or business enablement, but really that, like, how do you actually support and manage the actual AWS platform itself?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely a challenge for talent today, and we see that, and our bar's pretty high, as you might imagine. But we still see the kind of the war on talent going on, right? It's a supply and demand thing, right? As companies understand that the capabilities exist to have faster times to market at a more cost-effective rate, if they invest in people who have these skills, then that will be the demand. And IT folks will, I mean, we're lifelong learners, just by our profession, right? So, and we love learning new things. We love building. And so I think there continues to be, we see it continues to be a pipeline of engineers that are getting trained and, doing more and more training, getting more and more certifications. And so I think the the supply of skills available will at some point here in the next few years, start to provide less of a stress on the system. Whether you're us trying to hire skilled people or an enterprise company trying to build their own teams. But what you can't forget about is it's one thing, and we know this, right? It's one thing to go out and get a cert, right? So we can go take the test and get the AWS Associate Solution Architect cert. And you can take that and you can go work for a company and work on an environment and work on an application or a set of applications. And you'll learn and you'll grow at a certain rate. Andy Jassy says there's no compression algorithm for experience. There's no way to shortcut that, And so what we get to see because of the nature of our business is we see so many different, challenges and opportunities and ways to solve problems. Like it's an accelerated path for our team, right? Because we see so many different ways to solve problems. And that's part of the benefit of partnering with another service provider, right? Is your team can only go so fast. They're only going to get exposure to a certain set of problems that they need to solve. Whereas you could, bring a partner alongside that said, these guys have seen this 10 times. They've tried it 8 ways that haven't worked as well. We might have gone through those 8 ways for 2 years before we figured that out. So it accelerates their time to market in a more cost-effective way by leveraging the experience of our team.
Hi, I'm Max Clark, and you're listening to the Tech Deep Dive podcast. At Clarksys, we believe tech should make your life better, searching Google is a waste of time, and the right vendor is often one you haven't heard of before. With thousands of negotiated contracts, Clarksys has helped hundreds of businesses source and implement the right tech at the right price. If you're looking for a new vendor and want to have peace of mind knowing you've made the right decision, visit us at clarksys.com to schedule an intro call. AWS is a massive, massive business by itself. I mean, when you look at the numbers of it, it's staggering. And the other part of it that's just absolutely mind-boggling is how fast it continues to grow. Yeah. We're nowhere near peak cloud adoption. I mean, it feels like this is like infancy, like early 90s internet adoption, worldwide in terms of what's actually going on to the cloud. And, for a while it was okay, I think transition existing IT infrastructure, or we have this data center that's renewing, or we have to, we're aging out. We've depreciated all of our gear and we have to replace it because we're at life cycle. And so, okay, let's take that to the cloud. And those are like very low hanging fruit kind of tactical project realities. And what we've seen with machine learning and data lakes and these sorts of things have become, how do you actually now utilize your data and information that you're collecting already just by the nature of being in business, and now create additional value and uniqueness and competitive nature for an organization out of this information that you already have. It's we already have it. Now what do we do with it? And you guys are helping people figure these things out. I mean, this is something where how do we get into machine learning, and what does this mean for us, and what is a data lake, and how do we build these pipelines? I mean, how do you how do you help companies when they say, oh, we've never heard of this thing before, but we want to think about it? What is that like?
Yeah. So just your first point about how fast the business is growing, AWS, 451 Research estimated a while ago that hyperscale providers are going to grow at a CAGR of 46%.
That's insane.
And eclipse $106 billion in annual revenue by 2021, by next year, right? And AWS represents 56% of that. So, they're still others are catching up, right? But they're still the leader for sure in that. And so, the way that we help customers sort of introduce these new concepts is, we're doing this with the company now, right? They're in a data center. They were in a colo environment with another large provider, and they weren't in a true cloud environment. And they said, we've got this application. We have very large customers, banks, et cetera. We're a bit risk averse. How do we take advantage of cloud infrastructure? And so we said, well, there's this technology out there that's called Hadoop, right? And there's these clusters. And they're like, whoa, we're risk averse. Like, let's be careful here, right? And so we said, well, let's do some sort of proof of concept stuff, right? And so we'll do things for customers that are very fast. I mean, within a few weeks, time to market to test these things called minimum viable clouds. So you've heard of like MVPs, right? Minimum viable products. So we'll build a minimum viable cloud. and we'll say, look, we'll automate it and we'll iterate on it, right? So because it's automated, we can make revisions to it and rerun it again. We can do it over and over and over. Did this work? Blow it away. Boom. Let's run it again. Make some changes. Boom. Run it again. And so we were able to build this sort of minimum viable cloud to prove out this idea of this new technology that it's the cloud empowers or enables that this company hadn't been able to didn't know a huge amount about. Of course, had heard about it and everything, but we were able to prove it out in a way that was about their business with their data and with their application in this minimum viable cloud sort of approach. And so that's what we do. We'll build these proof of concepts for customers that exemplify some of these capabilities and make it about their problem set, their market, their customers, their environment, and we can do it very rapidly with them.
What's your experience been in terms of integration and interaction with the business? Are we still seeing this dominated from IT teams and CIOs and CTOs leading the charge? Yeah, or CFOs, CMOs, CROs? Like, what's actually happening? Over the last year in terms of what's driving these conversations and applications coming down the pipe.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So it used to be, I think that there's a lot of talk around. Well, our CFO's driving this, but frankly, what we see is we see it sort of equivalent across the board. Like there's no heavier, like we always get it from the business side or we always get it from the IT side. What's been different about it, I think, is that there's support on both sides. So it used to be like when the IT team would want to play with some new toys and try out some new cool stuff in the cloud, the business was like, hold on a second, you guys, just want to spend more money or whatever, right? Or when the business side would say, hey, we need to figure out a way to save more money, the IT team are like, we're doing the best we can, we're this is what you've given us kind of thing. But now there seems to be more partnership, frankly, between IT teams and the business, and there seems to be more sort of support from both sides that say, yeah, we understand there's benefit there. We understand the benefit is financial. We understand its security and performance. How do we sort of work together to get there? So, you talked about what is our process. I mean, part of that experience is, we have an engagement model that we call the Effectual Way, and this engagement model with customers is a project model that helps sort of take our customers through a process that involves members of their business team. It involves members of their IT team. We have an executive sponsor on our side that comes alongside their executive sponsor to make sure we can have that business conversation. And we have architects and engineers on the technical side. And we have biweekly meetings with our executive sponsors to make sure that we're focused on the business outcomes and the financial goals, and they're hitting their strategic goals. And of course, we're having daily tactical sort of meetings with the technical team to achieve the milestones or the deliverables. But one of the things that we do, I think that seems to be our customers tell us is competitively differentiating anyway, is we have a client collaboration portal, and we actually invite everybody into the portal. We say, here's the plan. The plan's out there because customers hire us to be prescriptive, right? They say, we hired you guys to tell us how we're supposed to go do this. And so here's the plan, right? We put it in the portal. We invite them into the portal, and then they're a part of the process. So it's kind of like, I don't know if people know what sort of Salesforce chatter looks like, but there's like a threaded discussion capability in this platform where you can actually talk about tasks or milestones or upload documents and collaborate together as a customer and a partner and a business team. And that's very, the transparency builds a level of trust and confidence, and it really works well.
Late 2000s, right? So a decade plus ish ago, when AWS first came out and the cloud started, I think it was a lot of fear in terms of IT and traditional IT of what is this going to mean and how does this evolve. And it's actually been really exciting for me in watching this shift and this transition, because companies are looking at IT now as strategic assets for their business, and it's less about cost and expense centers that have to be constrained, and more about how are we leveraging IT as a strategic enabler for our employees and for our customers and to accelerate our business. And that's in the sense of IT and people getting into IT now, I mean, it's a very exciting transition and change, versus what's historically been the case for the last 25 years. We talked about onboarding and migrations and application architectures and reviews. We haven't really talked a lot about ongoing management and interaction and support And this becomes also a very important thing in terms of maintaining and supporting a well-functioning cloud environment. If you have an issue with AWS, what do? You open an email ticket and you wait on hold, or that's not really a fantastic pathway for a company that needs support, and especially if they don't have a lot of exposure to it. So, I mean, how do you fit into that, and how does Effectual help an enterprise, with the, let's say the more mundane day to day of the support cycle, and then of course what becomes the exciting events, with support, support issues.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's great. So the core of what we do is manage services, right? So these other professional services are to help get people into an operating state, right? The professional services side of things is sort of a temporal thing, right? We've got to migrate to the cloud, we've got to build something on the cloud, but at the end of the day, you need to operate your business, right? So that's where the sort of core depth of expertise is and the focus of our business. And you can think about all these different aspects of operations and maintenance around patching and or just broadly security, compliance, monitoring, and then you dig deeper in those and you have backups and patching. And then you can go more broad, like what about workspaces or virtual desktops, that capability and to enable more of the business users in a business. And how do you maintain that, operate that, be responsive to your customer base around that? So we have, we talked about how automation is helpful and to customers. Automation is helpful for us as a business. So we're always looking to automate some of those more mundane things. So how do we automate a patching process? Or do we even need a patching process, right? Because if you have immutable infrastructure, you actually don't even need it, right? So
Right. Containers change that equation very quickly, right?
right. That's another one of those sort of innovative, modernization engineer introduction of, hey, I know your business has talked to you about patching for a long time. Here's another idea. What do you think about this? So, automating things that are more mundane, sort of the housekeeping things in an environment like patching and backups and monitoring and some of the, sort of guardrail type security things and the automated monitoring and automated remediation of things around compliance, protecting HIPAA data or, PCI. So we automate those things to as much extent possible. And we have a run book that we develop with a customer. And we say, here's all the ways that we're going to automate these things for you. Here's our engagement model. And it's not just a ticketing platform. There is a ticketing platform, of course, but we also use Slack and we use more interactive models for to be a part of their team. Again, the goal is to be a part of their team. We've seen this in our history, right? Some providers will say, yeah, we have a new managed customer, and you sign a 3-year deal and you kind of don't hear from them unless there's a problem. So if there's a problem in your infrastructure, you send a ticket and then somebody will call you maybe. But you hear about them again when the contract comes up for renewal, right? In 3 years, like, hey, your contract's up for renewal. You should renew for another 3 years. And you're like, I haven't heard from you in 3 years, like, unless there's a problem and I call you. And we just flip that on its head. We're like, we can't be a partner unless we're engaged with them on a regular basis in their business. So we have monthly service reviews. We have a service delivery manager who that's their whole job, is to make sure that we are partnering with our customers well. So they conduct monthly service reviews and quarterly business reviews where they drag the executive sponsor out there and say, hey, we're going to share what's going on in our business also, not just what's going on in your business. Let us tell you what's going on in our business. And I think the model for our engagement of managing customers in a more automated, innovative way, in addition to the human engagement aspect of it, right, is a big differentiator for us.
Runbooks are interesting animals, and when you look at it from, infrastructure as code and CI/CD pipelines and constantly changing environments, as you're getting into these things and you're turning up and turning off, infrastructure inside of a cloud, there's a lot of change to that. And so a runbook, it's not in the sense of like the old monolithic static application of like, if this happens, do this. It changes a lot. But I think what's great with runbooks is the process of going through and establishing it. And in a lot of cases, just for an enterprise of saying, here's an area of responsibility, and here is a process that we're going to take if certain. And a lot of times that discipline hasn't existed yet, and especially the migration to the cloud. So having a partner actually walk through that process, how you develop a run book to help operate your environment. And it really reminds me of a CTO. a few years ago, and he was traveling back and forth. I mean, he was on a plane a lot between offices for this company, and every time he was on a plane, he realized that he was completely stressed out. Not because he had this fear that AWS was going to collapse on him while I was on the plane. It was more of the what would happen if we did have an outage in US East and this took down infrastructure, and what would actually occur. And he, and he was really looking for and interested in a partner to help provide that structure and, supervision, almost, to know that there was somebody responsible to make sure that things happen in an ordered and defined way, in case that goes along. So when you say runbook, I go to that thought pretty quickly. But I want to talk about containers. Containers give a lot of advantages in development pipelines. They give portability. They give the ability to migrate from one cloud platform to another platform pretty easily, or run on a desktop versus running on a cloud environment. But I mean, at this point, is containers the right place to go? I mean, should you be talking more? Is serverless? I mean, serverless. Should we just skip this entire container conversation now with companies migrating
Yeah,
applications?
that's a great point. So serverless is obviously a more modern architectural capability, and is kind of the next evolution beyond containerization. So there are a number of ways that serverless is beneficial, and it's not always the answer. It's not a silver bullet, like a lot of people want to say, find the one ring to rule them all. Serverless is not quite that, but there are a lot of ways you can leverage serverless. So in the data lake example, for example, right? So you could have a containerized architecture to do analysis of data in data lakes, or you could have triggers that have serverless, you know, API calls, if you will. So serverless functions that are triggered on a change in the data lake that's more responsive. So rather than setting up sort of an ETL process that might be normal, and run a sort of an ETL batch process on a particular time for data analysis, you can use serverless architecture to be more responsive in real time and trigger on events that change in the environment in the data lake itself. So if a new file gets dropped in a certain place in the data lake, you can have a serverless function to respond to that and do the ingestion or the transformation or the loading aspect of that. So we see serverless changing in data lake architecture and large scale data processing architecture. There's a good architecture paradigm there for serverless. And there have been cases where companies have said, we built our website using serverless with static pages and S3 buckets and things like that. I would say those are probably smaller scale websites and not really enterprise class SaaS applications, if you will. There are pieces of that that can be enabled using serverless, but it's not a panacea for everything.
I mean, you get into a pretty big debate pretty quickly of monolithic versus microservices architecture and
Sure.
software development, and and there's a lot of passions that come out, and everybody is pretty entrenched at this point. So I think it's I like how you respond to that. I mean, it's not. I don't think that there's one
Right.
right way. It's just that there's but it feels like every week there's just more options,
Mhm.
and
That's a
as
good way to say
there's
it.
more as
Yeah.
and when you take that and you say, okay, every week you have another new option now of what to do. How do you make those decisions and decide, what's the right path forward? I mean, everything becomes a good option at some point, and how do you actually decide, this is the best option for me?
Well, I think people should talk to you about that. I think that you do a fantastic job. I think your customers are lucky to have you as their strategic advisor, because you do understand that they're not these silver bullets or one rings, and there's a different um, solutions can be applied, and you do understand the breadth of cloud services and physical infrastructure. Again, in your case, there's no compression algorithm for experience. And I think your customers benefit from that. And we benefit from that as a partner of yours, because, we have a very high bandwidth conversation about ways that we can help you and your customers. And it's very effective relationship with us. And so we really appreciate your partnership.
Oh, I thank you for the nice words. I really do. I appreciate it. I wish I had a crystal ball to look forward 10 years. I don't have it. I'm curious if you have it, and
Ooh.
let's make it a little bit shorter. let's not make it 10 years. Let's talk about 1 to 2 years. I mean, Effectual has made a huge bet. I mean, you've made a huge bet on this,
Mhm.
and so what is your vision over the next 1, 2, 3 years? Beyond that becomes like plan and ideals, but we know that changes. So I mean, what does this look like over the next few quarters?
Yeah, there are continue to be larger companies, or the larger companies are adopting cloud infrastructure, but there's a bigger opportunity there to impact those businesses. And that's where we want to be, right? We want to be at the center of the hard problems, the center of security and compliance problems. We don't shy away from those things because we know there's proper solutions with cloud architecture that can be automated and cost effective for businesses. And so, our goal is to continue to do that up market for larger businesses and work with their teams to solve more interesting challenges. That's where our expertise is historically. We've been able to do that for some very large brands, in the data pipe days as well. So I think, where do we move? We'll continue to see more automation. Infrastructure as code will become more of a normal vernacular, and people will understand it. IT professionals will understand how to leverage that. What does infrastructure as code mean? Are we talking about Ansible and Ansible playbooks? Are we talking about Terraform? Are we talking about they'll start to understand how to put those pieces together to automate their own infrastructure, CI/CD pipelines for not only infrastructure deployment but content deployment, where IT professionals don't even have to touch a server to get code deployed to a WordPress website, for example. Those things, we're doing them today, and I think those things gain momentum. They gain more prevalence in the future. Um, so yeah, that's what we're excited to do. Just drive that adoption more and more, and we hope to operate our business in a similar way as AWS does in terms of it's always day one, right? We're always innovating. Our engineers are always training, always learning, always getting certifications, and we're it's always day one. We're always hungry to figure out ways to help our customers, and we want to stay that way.
So when we talk about, briefly the market with the other cloud platforms, and AWS is the largest and growing the fastest, right? But so Microsoft Azure and GCP, I mean, these are both also, very good cloud platforms.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, do you think that this is going to turn into like a Coke versus Pepsi debate? Or are we talking about hyper specialization where you're now kind of looking at it like, oh, we've decided we're in Office 365, so that automatically means that a certain X percentage of our business ends up in Azure, even if the majority of our infrastructure is in AWS, or vice versa with Google? Like, how do you guys see this playing out right now?
Yeah. AWS has a lead, but there are certainly, some particular services that have better implementations, or for a particular use case, they're better on other platforms. It depends on the use case. My dad used to say, use the right tool for the right job, right? And it makes the world a difference. And so I think we will see more parity among the cloud platforms as they continue to grow. They'll still have some of their strengths and weaknesses, but I think those strengths and weaknesses over the next, 3 to 5 years will become sort of less obvious and more esoteric almost, right? And so I think you will be able to solve similar problems on all the platforms as you can today. There may be a more natural move toward one platform over another, given a company's history. But just to say that, because a company is a Microsoft shop and they have, Microsoft EA, then they've got to move to Azure is not is becoming less and less of a valid argument. I'd say it's not a perfectly valid argument today. We're certainly seeing that, but there are commercial aspects of that, not just technical aspects of that. So um, yeah, I think you have to take into consideration the commercial pieces with pricing and, incentives from those different platform providers for those customers, as well as the technical specialty things that a company may need over time.
An interesting stat that came out recently was that more than 50% of the compute on Azure was running Linux. And
Yeah.
I mean, and
Well,
there's two ways.
finally, right?
I mean, God bless them. It's amazing, right? But I mean, you can
Right.
kind of look at that a couple different ways. When I read that stat, you're like, okay, this is incredible that Microsoft has really adopted and is really embraced a pretty amazing shift in what they were focused on historically over time, and acquisitions and focuses and developer enablement, and all these things. But at the same time, the flip of that is you'd think that number would be much higher if this is like Microsoft is incentivizing or pushing Microsoft environments into Azure. That it feels like I kind of wonder about that too. And
Yeah.
AWS, has there's some really interesting things that AWS does around like instantiating and starting up Windows environments. Having machines, VMs, effectively ready to go, so that way you don't have this big build delay if you want to go into Windows. I mean, it'll be fun to watch as these three competitors evolve and mature. I think it'll be harder and harder for upstarts and new cloud vendors to get into the market unless they're extremely specialized into something. But the efficiency of scale and the cost economics, and they're all building their own hardware. They all have a lot of resources available to do that. And AWS, at what Amazon's doing with their Nitro platform, it's incredible when you actually dig into the hardware of it. I mean, we should spend another hour later and just talk about Nitro, but it really is amazing. And to go back to something you said originally that I wrote down here in my note sheet, a couple of years ago, I racked what I hope is going to be my last Cisco ASR 9000. I mean, not that I don't like Cisco ASRs, I actually love the box, but like the actual concept of literally having to forklift a several 100-pound device into a cabinet and then bolt it down and then wire it and configure it. And it's cool. I mean, there's a sense of like even thinking about it, like, it's so exciting to like configure a big router, when you have like, and you're, but it's like, it matters if you're a network service provider. If you're actually building network infrastructure, having network equipment matters. And if you're a data center company, having data center space matters. And if you're a cloud provider, having cloud infrastructure matters. But for an enterprise, it doesn't matter so much. It's like, what are you actually trying to do? And that's what you should focus on.
Yeah, that's right. And helping broaden that thinking or realize that thinking for our customers is really the exciting part for us. Like introducing them to these new ideas that they didn't know existed before, or containers or whatever it is, right? And then doing a proof of concept to sort of prove it out, right? And it's awesome to see them go, wow, this is an innovation that we had no idea how to do. Thanks for helping us figure this out. And it's really cool. We love that you mentioned the physical sort of tangible satisfaction of looking back. I mean, I felt it. I felt it when you were saying it, right? Like, yeah, you look at a rack and you look at the beautiful wiring in the back of it and you go, I did that. That's good. I'm going to go have dinner now. And that was, there's a sense of satisfaction about that, right? So yeah, I get that, but we get that kind of satisfaction, from watching a customer go, wow, this was amazing, right? We didn't think we could do this, and look, there it is,
Chuck, thank you so much for your time. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and I feel like every time I walk away with it, I'm going to be jazzed up for the rest of the day. So,
hey, thank you, man. It's always great to spend time with you, and I look forward to doing it physically when we can. It'll be good to get together again.
Likewise. Thanks for joining the Tech Deep Dive podcast. At Clarksys, we believe tech should make your life better. Searching Google is a waste of time, and the right vendor is often one you haven't heard of before. We can help you buy the right tech for your business. Visit us at clarksys.com to schedule an intro call.